I'd like to welcome our grand jury members and viewers back to a very special episode of the Citizens Grand Jury with your prosecutor, Larry Klayman. Larry, today we are joined by Dr. Judy Mikovits and her co-author, Kent Heckenlively. We're going to be hearing some expert testimony from them. What are we going to be looking at today in the indictment of Dr. Anthony Fauci?
Well, we're not only going to seek the indictment of Dr. Anthony Fauci, but we're seeking the indictment of the People's Republic of China and its Wuhan Laboratory of Virology. So they're all wrapped up into one conspiratorial bow. But before I get into that, let's just recap where we are. This is the 8th edition of our Citizens Grand Jury. Previously, we have indicted Joe Biden, his son Hunter, and James Biden. We have preliminary findings. We are continuing to flesh out the indictments in that regard, and we'll be presenting them to you through your foreman. And also, we have indicted John Kerry with regard to his acts concerning his treasonous activity that we previously mentioned, as well as Mitch McConnell for also taking money under the table from Communist China laundered through his wife, Elaine Chao. So this is where we are as of today. Those indictments have already been obtained. We are now flushing out the charges to put them on notice. We will then try them. They'll have notice. They can defend themselves and are willing to appear, hopefully. If not, we'll try them in absentia. And we will also then seek their convictions and sentencing and seek to make that out peacefully and legally. But this week, there's been a lot of discussion in particular with regard to the People's Republic of China and its Wuhan lab, as well as Dr. Anthony Fauci, his involvement with having sent over to that Wuhan lab the seeds of COVID-19, a SARS derivative of that virus, which we have experts, and one of them is appearing here today, Dr. Judy Mikovits, as well as Kent Heckenlively, her partner, who has written a variety of books, and we're going to get into that with regard to viruses and exactly what's going on right now. And we'll be presenting another expert next week, Francis Boyle from the University of Illinois, and I'll bring in my Israeli colleagues as well, because Freedom Watch, and this is an absolute disgrace, it took Freedom Watch, our group, to file a class action against the Communist Chinese in Dallas, Texas. We have sought to serve the Communist Chinese on 2 occasions under appropriate procedures. The clerk of the court in Dallas sent the indictment, first by DHL, then by Federal Express. The Chinese, thumbing their nose at the American legal system,
would you send a chat message that I'm waiting in the waiting room, please?
If you can...
in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see 3 dots.
Stay on mute, please.
Yeah, if you can mute the sound there, and we'll bring Judy
like
and
maybe
Kent
he's
in
letting
at
me
the
in
appropriate
now.
moment. We can mute the sound.
You should be good, Larry.
Okay. Thank you, Judy and Kent. So we then sought to serve the Chinese, the Wuhan lab, the Chinese government. They rejected service, thumbing their nose at the United States and our legal system. And we went back to the court and we said, well, we need an alternative method of service. And the magistrate judge, who was not terribly cooperative, it doesn't surprise me, you know, I've talked about federal judges and federal judges before. Perhaps he's afraid himself of what might happen with regard to the Chinese, said, well, you have to go through the State Department. So we went through the State Department at great expense. It costs about $2,500 each time you try to serve, and it takes some period of time. The State Department, now being run by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, sat on it. We were inquired, what's happening? And just the other day, they came back with nonsense in terms of why we didn't serve it properly, give it to them properly, which is false, because actually we have served countries that are terrorist countries before, Iran, using the same exact method. So we're going to be pressing on the State Department to get the job done. But it tells you something about what you're up against in our accepted legal system. And this is why the Citizens Grand Jury is so important, because really all that matters is that the Communist Chinese and its lab at Wuhan get notice. That's all. And then they have an opportunity to defend themselves. But they don't want to defend themselves because if they come into court and they have to testify, then they'll have to lie under oath. And if they should ever visit this country again, potentially, they could be arrested, for perjury and obstruction of justice and other things. But this is the way it works. Americans do the same thing, believe me, dishonest Americans and others throughout the world. They flout our legal system. And this is why the citizens must rise up themselves. Now, our colleagues in Jerusalem, Israel, have gone through a similar issue in that they did serve under Israeli law, the government of China, the Communist Chinese, and believe it or not, the Israeli government came in to try to protect the Communist Chinese. There's a lot of Chinese investment, as there is everywhere in Israel. And I suspect that once we do get service of process in the civil case, it's a class action for the huge amount of damage they've done to our health, to our economy, to our emotional well-being. The same case as in Israel, that the governments will come in, our corrupt Justice Department will come in and seek to protect the Communist Chinese, because that's the way governments are. You protect me, I'll protect you. Let the people be damned. Doesn't matter whether you're a communist government or a so-called capitalist government. And I say so-called because Biden and Harris have moved us way beyond capitalism into socialism and borderline communism. So they actually have an affinity with the Communist Chinese. And you saw that in the leftist media that always protects the Communist Chinese with regard to what is obvious was a bioweapon which was engineered and got out either accidentally or by design to harm the United States and the rest of the world. We also had filed a criminal complaint with the International Criminal Court in The Hague, Holland. And that was done about a year ago. And there's been no activity there as well. Europeans, obviously, are even more timid than Americans and Israelis. And they have just simply sat on this. The court is primarily composed of European jurists and prosecutors, and we'll be pressing on that. But I point all of this out to make one basic point, which is this is what is so important about the citizens' grand jury, because these governments, frankly, are corrupt, whether it's our government, the Communist Chinese government, or to a large extent, the Israeli government. They don't want to proceed because they don't want the same thing to happen to them. They don't want to be held accountable for allegations of wrongdoing overseas in terms of their own countries. And today, we are seeking the indictment of the People's Republic of China and also the Wuhan lab, but even more importantly, someone who is within the jurisdiction of the United States, clearly in terms of physical location, Dr. Anthony Fauci, notwithstanding his mixed messaging, notwithstanding the fact that most of the time he doesn't know what he's talking about, or at least doesn't wish to tell the truth to the American people, is the fact, as you'll hear testimony right now, Dr. Judy Mikovits worked with him at the Armed Forces at Fort Detrick, Maryland, which is where we study viruses, which is where we actually manufacture our own bioweapons. You might remember after 9/11, the anthrax that attacked this country actually emanated from Fort Detrick, Maryland. It was given to the Iranians, to Saddam, to the Iraqis by Bush, Rumsfeld, Bush the dad, and Cheney. And it got out. And the FBI sought to blame people who were not really involved. One of them was so despondent he committed suicide, quite typical for the FBI when their incompetence cannot find or doesn't want to find the culprit. But that being said, Judy worked with Fauci. She knows all about him. She knows, frankly, what a criminal he is. And we're going to get testimony in that regard. And then we're also going to get expert testimony on the likelihood of the virus, the COVID-19 virus, being a bioweapon and something that was engineered out of that lab. So that being said, I'm going to then ask Dr. Mikovits to testify and to give us information. As you know, in front of a grand jury, you don't even need evidence, but this is evidence. And it is evidence because she has firsthand knowledge in particular. And then Kent Heckenlively will also amplify what Judy has said, and they'll talk about the various publications that they have issued. Certainly as eye-opening, as important as the ones with Peter Schweitzer that we've used earlier on in these citizens grand juries. So I want to introduce Dr. Judy Mikovits to you. Judy, thank you for appearing before the citizens grand jury.
If I may, Larry, before Dr. Mikovits presents her testimony, I just want to remind our viewers that they can watch simulcasts of the Citizens Grand Jury on the Freedom Watch YouTube channel. It's absolutely free to subscribe to Freedom Watch's YouTube channel. And certainly the more people who see these proceedings, the better. It's very important that people hear this information. And it's also important that people support Freedom Watch by going to freedomwatchusa.org. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Dr. Mikovits, if you would please provide your testimony.
Yes, and let me ask Judy to start with your experience, how you got to know Dr. Fauci, and how you worked with him. First, explain your own expertise to the citizens grand juries, because you are an expert, who you are, and then tell us how you came to know and work with Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Well, I started work at Fort Detrick June 10th, 1980, after graduating with a degree in chemistry and a specialization in biology from University of Virginia on May 18th, 1980. I was at the fermentation chemistry program. My job was to literally grow cell lines, grow biological response modifiers like type 1 interferon, interleukin 2, which had been discovered in 1978 by Frank Rossetti and Bob Gallo's lab. And interleukin 2 is a growth factor that's necessary for T cells. At the time in Japan, there was a serious aggressive T cell leukemia, T cell cancer that was just very deadly. And the ability to grow T cells and develop cell lines that were immortalized, essentially take from human beings with the disease, the cell lines, and isolate from those the viruses, which was done by Frank and Bernie Poise in Bob Gallo's lab at NIH. So in the National Cancer Institute, it's important to know that the National Cancer Institute, when then President Nixon declared the war on cancer, I guess very early 70s, sorry, I was a kid, but I don't know the exact date, but he put the Cancer Institute at Fort Detrick in Frederick, Maryland, in what used to be biological warfare work. Not only the biosafety level 4 with USAMRIID, U.S. Army Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, which was literally, and I see Jason's depiction of Fort Detrick. There's a softball field, a baseball field, or an award ceremony field right across in between the building we worked in. It's literally a short walk from our biosafety level 3 lab in building 560 at the time, and later 567, across to USAMRIID's military institution. So I'm working in fermentation chemistry, literally growing the viruses. You must use a growing, immortalized, meaning lives and grows forever cell line in order to grow viruses, to study them, to isolate them, to expand them. You must use this. This is the work I did for isolating or making large quantities of that HTLV1 interleukin 2, purifying those viruses, before I even met and worked with Frank Rossetti. This was being done by Gallo, not at the time Tony Fauci, because the National Cancer Institute had the charge by the government. All the special cancer virus program did in 1980 to 1983 and longer was look for animal viruses associated, look for cancer-causing viruses. So the entire program was cancer. And it's very important because Bob Gallo and Tony Fauci, then with the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, never worked at Fort Detrick. So they were the bosses of studies. They funded studies. We were working for the contractor as President Ronald Reagan had been, and you know, it's kind of tough for this because then President Ronald Reagan had campaigned on reducing the size of the federal government. And what he did with that was really a scam. He reduced the size of the federal government by terminating people, giving them reduction in force paperwork. So for no reason other than to take them off the rolls. So of the government. So we were hired by pharmaceutical company contractors, and in some cases defense contractors as these programs evolved. One of the last contractors I worked for in the 22 years I was at Fort Detrick was SAIC, Science Application International Corporation. This was a defense contracting company. So very important to know that Tony Fauci never worked at Fort Detrick, nor did Bob Gallo. So physically, from that standpoint, I never worked with him or for him. The Cancer Institute collaborates with the NIAID, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, and they are but two of the more than 20 institutes in the NIH. So they fund the studies, you collaborate with the studies. The Gallos and the Faucis are then the bosses. So they pay the bills, they make the decisions, but I'm a hired gun. I'm a hired gun that just does my job. So
And wait, let me stop you there, Judy. What are your qualifications for the citizen?
I have a BA in chemistry from University of Virginia, and then I got a PhD in 1992. So I worked for almost the entire of the 10 years, starting my PhD in 1987, working with Frank. So my PhD was defended November 14th, 1991, and the topic of it was HIV latency in monocytes. That's keep the virus dormant. If it doesn't cause the immune dysregulation, the cytokine storm, literally the exact cytokine storm that we saw in the other retroviral associated diseases, XMRVs and HIV. And that it's the dysregulated immune system that is the disease. So during that entire window between 83 at the biological response modifiers programs, we made drugs like type 1 interferon, natural product drugs, and things like hyperbaric oxygen therapy, ozone therapy, peptide T, the subject of the movie, the Dallas Buyers Club. So we worked in this multidisciplinary team of doctors, nurses, PhDs. So my qualifications now are that I spent more than 22 years at the National Cancer Institute, rising from that entry-level technician to, in 1999, assuming the directorship of the Lab of Antiviral Drug Mechanisms. So our entire job at that time was to develop drugs and diagnostics for AIDS-associated cancers, not HIV-associated cancers, AIDS, when you cripple the immune system. The virus is not the disease. Those are my qualifications. And during the 90s, I worked paid for by NIAID collaborations with the National Cancer Institute. I worked in that USAMRIID facility, I would say from 92 through 94. We published a paper late in the year in Nature showing how I was infecting, I was using bat tissues, I was isolating, taking Ebola virus and finding cell lines where the virus wouldn't kill them. If the virus kills the host, the virus is dead. It's
okay, let me stop you there. Excellent recitation of your qualifications. What information do you have that the seeds, I'm saying this in a layman's sense, a Klayman sense, okay, that the seeds of COVID-19 came from the United States and that Fauci had something to do with it.
There
We
is,
can isolate on that, and
yes,
it was sent to Wuhan, and that we helped fund the research over there, and why.
correct. There is a 2015 publication, and I'll try to pull it up, that I actually presented when I did the interview with Joshua Phillips, that aired, that was for the Epoch Times, that aired April 8th of 2020. That paper had in the material and methods that they use that Vero E6 cell line that I worked with in the 90s, growing bat tissues, Ebola, many strains of those viruses for decades earlier at USAMRIID, and understanding the pathogenesis. So in that 2015 paper that from the Wuhan lab, it says clearly in the material and methods, they got the Vero E6 cells from Fort Detrick, USAMRIID. The entire study was funded by NIAID, by Tony Fauci. Many have asked me, oh, Judy, that has nothing to do with it. You can get Vero monkey kidney cell lines anywhere, and you can. They're all around the world. Now, the reason they needed that cell line from that source is they're the ones that had the parent viruses, had the original SARS, which SARS-CoV-2 is a variant, have SIV sequences, have the XMRVs, have the mouse viruses contaminating that cell line. It's been in that lab for however long, from 92 to
When you're
now.
saying they, you're talking about the Wuhan lab?
I'm talking about Fort Detrick's.
Oh, Fort Detrick,
Fort
okay.
Detrick's biosafety level 4. So the shipment, the cell line, the seeds, the cell line is the seeds. Literally, it's got 2 million cells in a 2 ml vial kept at liquid nitrogen temperature, and you simply pull the vial and you mail it around the world. And we do it all the time. It's standard operating procedure. And right there in the 2015 paper, 15 years after I left, or 14 years after I left the National Cancer Institute, they use that cell line, in these studies. But the seeds were already there. The viruses were already there. They'd been there for 30 years. In fact, the 2014 Ebola that killed 21,000 Liberians came straight from the Vero monkey kidney cell. We make our polio vaccines in there and other vaccines. We know it had 300 mutations, gain of function studies. Tony Fauci released that, in my opinion and basis, on the Liberians in Sierra Leone, killed more than 21,000 people and it was infectious transmissible Ebola. And this is in our book, Plague of Corruption, detailed. We know the mutations would not have occurred in nature, those gain of function studies. So those viruses have been in that laboratory in Wuhan since the mid-90s. And Tony Fauci conveniently directed the release of that in this program in 2014 to cover up William Thompson of the CDC's confession that, and you can see this all on NPR, and we've made slides and data and documented this in our 2 books and the thousands of pages that aren't in the 2 books.
Well, why did Fauci do that? Why is he releasing these viruses to Wuhan
just
and
a
to other
second.
places?
Dr. Mikovits, I just want to address a small technical issue. It's been cleared up. I'm sorry. Please carry on.
Okay, what I'm asking is what was the motive of Fauci releasing these viruses, the seeds of COVID-19?
Experiments on humans to see if they could in fact kill, if the gain of function studies, if the work in the motive in the case of 2014 was the cover up of William Thompson's confession that that they had, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, had covered up for almost 15 years the data that MMR, 3 RNA viruses in a single vaccine, the MMR vaccine, if given to Blacks and Hispanics before they were 3 years old, had a 2 to 4 times greater relative risk of getting neurodegenerative diseases, autism, or even dying from the vaccine. And so that information was released by Dr. Brian Hooker. He did almost 15 years of FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request, finally got a confession from William Thompson, Dr. William Thompson of the CDC, and Senator Posey of Florida was sending that to Congress and going to do a full investigation of what was going on. So the attention was directed when everybody thought, and knew there was a Ebola outbreak, and all of this is memorialized in the book by Kent and Amber Brantley, which is called "Called for Life" in the biblical sense. That was the doctor that got infected. It was a big experiment, and what the doctor used to cure Kent Brantley, the other Dr. John at the site, what he used to cure him was hydroxychloroquine.
Well, are you saying, let me stop you here. Let me again try to simplify. Are you saying that the seeds, the SARS virus, is related to Ebola and related also to COVID-19?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. These are why those variants are all in the cell lines. And I'll send the paper of the cell lines showing the bat tissues. They're just different families of bats that have these because Ebola would literally bleed out your lungs. So it didn't do much because like in Sierra Leone, 21,000 people died. They stopped the outbreak. But again, Tony Fauci and then President Obama, who I believe should be involved in indictments in the future.
Well, he will be.
They knew what was going on. And you can see that very clearly in the book Called for Life. And what they were trying to do when they called after Kent Brantley was cured, not by the CDC, not by the magic serum from San Diego, but by Dr. John. I won't use his last name unless you want to know his name.
Go ahead.
I know him personally, and
okay.
They live in Ventura. He runs Ventura County Healthcare, which tells me a lot about why Ventura is so heavily targeted and targeting us right now, because they're afraid, and they've been afraid since this book came out in 2015.
Now, the seeds of SARS are also related to HIV, correct?
Correct, because SIV is a monkey virus, simian immune deficiency virus.
So why did Fauci play a role in sending the SARS seeds over to the Wuhan lab? What was the reason to send it to the Chinese?
Because gain of function studies were illegal here. That's gain of function. So the studies had to be conducted somewhere else.
Now, are you aware that the United States government during the Obama administration, the Obama-Biden administration for that matter, provided money to the Wuhan lab to do these studies?
Yes, that same 2015 paper cites the funding and the actual NIH grant number.
So Fauci and Obama and Biden were using the communist Chinese to do research on this virus because it was illegal to do it in the United States.
Correct.
Okay. Now, tell us what information you have as to whether or not you have reason to believe that the SARS seeds virus, were then engineered by the Wuhan lab into a bioweapon.
Well, I believe this from and I don't remember the name of the woman scientist's name, but she's concerned because what you do there is you could make single base changes. such that you can get recombination events to happen. They're called splice acceptor and donor sites. So you can simply change one little base pair in the sequence and people won't notice, but the splicing happens very easily. So then you put the viruses back in the cell line, which is deficient in immune pathways like type 1 interferon. They can't gobble up and degrade these viruses. That's our frontline innate immune defense, that molecule that I was purifying in 1980. So the cell line is deficient in type 1 interferon. So if you make that change in an infectious molecular clone or otherwise, then you can get recombinants in only 2 weeks in one fermenter, in one 50-gallon, couple 100-liter fermenter. You can get cells where you really won't even know how many recombinants. And the female Chinese scientist that was doing this was concerned, because it's almost impossible to tell what's going to come in every fermentation, every time you grow hundreds of millions of cells. Why I have reason to believe this is exactly what was done with the XMRVs. The original sequence, which was in the gene bank, was changed in 2010 and 11 when our work wouldn't go away, showing how many strains of deadly, contagious, cancer-causing mouse viruses, how many strains were in every fermentation batch, every batch of the polio vaccine, every batch where you use the Vero monkey kidney cells. And we have a screenshot from 2011 when it was clear how heavily the blood supply was contaminated. And we had no idea it had anything to do with vaccines at that time, because that 2014 was when we learned of Brian Hooker's work right after our first book was in press. And this is why we wrote Plague of Corruption, because I said, I thought it was science, and it was a plague of corruption. So at any rate, what you do when you change the splice acceptor and donor sites, in only 2 weeks, you can get many different recombinants, many different variants, every fermentation batch. And she knew that. And most people don't, because they don't appreciate when you use these cell lines as manufacturing plants. They're kept in the labs for sometimes up to 40 or 50 years. They're continuously growing, and they harbor all of these strains. So at any given time, when you start talking about the India variant or the this variant or the that variant, I guarantee you they know exactly what's in these cell lines, and you can get what I call the strain du jour. You can get a new variant, a new strain. They just changed the word variant. No, it's strains. And they told us in the XMRV, oh, that's impossible. So they took down our entire study and they said, oh no, pre-XMRV 1 variant and pre-XMRV 2, only once did this ever happen. That's why we named this chapter in our book, Plague, the Immaculate Recombination. We have proof of it. We have the screenshot. We have people who were sick, who got the infections from the lab, nosocomial like me. And you got the infection, you have proof and evidence. And this is why on September 29th, when I was fired standing in the street, my lab was locked down and later broken into, Watergate style, everything taken, and the FBI knew it, the attorney generals knew it. We filed a lawsuit in 2014. It's the last chapter of our book, Plague of Corruption. So we know what they were doing. We published the papers. We did the work. They can sequence anything they want out of there and release it at any given time to hold us in that fear, when in fact, they're causing this, and they can cause it tomorrow and the next day and the next day if we don't stop it and murder hundreds of millions more than they have already.
What other books have you written? And then we'll move on to the next topic. But what other books do you have that the grand jurors can review, and we'll go through them, as well as the American people, that bear on this issue?
Kent and I have written Plague. Plague of Corruption, and The Case Against the Masks, 10 Reasons Why Mask Use Should Be Limited. We're in the process of writing with Dr. Frank Rossetti, who is the contemporary and the discoverer of these things, and he knows what Tony Fauci, Bob Gallo, Bill Hazeltine, Max Essex, Peter Duesberg, he was there. He's 79, Tony Fauci's 80, I'm 63. I was the technician in the woman. So the last book, Ending Plague, will be out in early August. We're finishing up the edits of that right now, but in fact, I learn every day of more and more things that can bring me back to evidence. So Frank and I are working day and night to, as things are being revealed each day, that make more and more culpability of Tony Fauci.
We will provide the books to our grand jurors, but where can the public who may be watching get those books?
They can, the ones that are already published can be published at can be purchased at all major booksellers, Books A Million, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. The Ending Plague, and we encourage our listeners to pre-order that book now. It can only be pre-ordered from Amazon. And because of the pre-orders we got with Plague of Corruption, A Plague of Corruption was published April 14th of 2020, and it sold out April 15th of 2020. It's been heavily censored since that time, but essentially only the people who pre-ordered the book got a copy. And so we're encouraging everyone. That is the way to stop the censorship, because the contract between the publisher and Amazon, they must ship it.
Now, I also discussed your case and Kent's cases in my book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. So we're going to also provide that to the grand jurors, and you can also get that at Amazon.com, Books A Million, and at Freedom Watch with a contribution of more than $50. We'll send it to you for free. Helps us fund these citizens' grand juries and our other work. But Fauci has been pushing these vaccines from day one. Why, in your opinion, your reasoned medical opinion, has he been pushing the vaccines? Does he have a financial involvement in that, to the best of your knowledge? Or even if he doesn't, why is he pushing them so hard? The vaccines that were created to allegedly cure or protect one from COVID-19.
He absolutely has a financial interest with Moderna and many other patents over the years. And I think the best person to testify on that is Dr. David E. Martin, who is in Plandemic and Dr. Nation, which you can find at plandemicseries.com. And he's got a dossier that I can provide to you of the crimes, of the patents, of the violations, of the money interests. That Tony Fauci has. So absolutely from the beginning, he's had patents in the case of HIV/AIDS and that epidemic, the first murder of millions with this exact same process that Tony Fauci's directed.
Now, the government has been pushing, to use the term government loosely, Biden and Harris, and even before that, President Trump, they've been pushing to take these vaccines. You see these commercials all over television and on radio. They're guilting the American people that they're risking other people's lives if they don't take it. What, in your reasoned opinion, your reasoned medical opinion and otherwise, are the side effects of these vaccines? Now, we've learned about them recently. We didn't know about them at first because they were covered up, whether it was blood clots or whether it was some other kinds of side effects. But what are the side effects based on your experience that you can experience short-term, medium-term, and long-term? And we'll also talk to Ken about that.
Well, I mean, simply stated, number one of the goals, the people who will die first from the injection of the spike protein, I'm just not going to call them vaccines because they meet no legal or biological definition. They cause the disease, fever, headache, chills, other things in the vulnerable. The spike protein alone is the HIV envelope, The XMRV envelope, known as syncytin and other gamma retroviruses, which is cross-reactive. Every animal has one. So monkeys have a syncytin gene, that envelope. And the third one is obviously the SARS ACE2 receptor. So the syncytia means fusion. So syncytia with viral envelope show you cells fused together. In our body, syncytin is important for the embryo to implant into the uterus. So when you inject another animal's syncytin, you will, number one, change a woman's cycle because she sees that gene go on only during certain places in a woman of childbearing ages and in the menstrual cycle. So when you turn that gene on, it says prepare the uterus to implant the fetus at the time. So syncytin's only expressed at certain times. What we did work back in 2004 to show if syncytin was expressed in the brain, it caused the cytokine storm that is characteristic of COVID and multiple sclerosis, Guillain-Barré, ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, another disease of inflammation of the brain and the spinal cord. When these envelope proteins, there's a neuroAIDS that is associated with like an Alzheimer's-like disease, and it has nothing to do with the copy number of the virus. All of our work was in this over the last 40 years. So my opinion and what we saw in the clinical trials and what we're seeing now, the blood clots are the ACE2 receptor lining all the capillaries. Syncytin is like Velcro, not covalent, Velcro, sticks them together. You see prion-like diseases when syncytin is expressed in the brain along with the precursor protein of prion. It's your own cellular protein expressed in the gene, and it gets misfolded when it comes through, and the syncytin is expressed at the same time. It can cause what's called spongiform encephalopathy. Your brain looks like it has a lot of holes in it because your immune system attacked itself. When you inject another animal's genome or virus, and you have the same expression from our 8% of our genome that is silenced viruses, that was my PhD thesis, silence in it doesn't cause disease. When you inject that, you'll get an autoimmune reaction as well. So we see miscarriages, stillbirths, women with blood clots who, are maybe even in menopause. We saw myalgic encephalomyelitis from the XMRVs, which are the same envelope as syncytin. I'm going to say the same. It's close enough that all our reagents detect it. When you express a virus, an endogenous virus or an exogenous virus in every tissue of the body, the resident stem cell monocyte macrophage, that was the basis of my thesis. That cell creates the cytokine storm. So you can get a multivariate, and we're seeing that. The last disease I associated with the XMRVs from mice, the exogenous gamma retroviruses, we called them HGRVs at the time. The last disease we associated firmly on June and presented to a world's expert June 2nd, 2011 was idiopathic thrombocytopenia. We have already seen it's a platelet, it's a bleeding disorder. You bleed out. We saw the 58-year-old gynecologist bleed out of idiopathic thrombocytopenia. So you get too few cells, you bleed out, you can't clot, you get too many cells, and the factors in factor VIII and things go awry, you get too much. Syncytin and the aberrant expression is at the heart of that signaling dysregulation.
Now, Ken, a woman taking these vaccines, whether it's Moderna, Pfizer, or Johnson & Johnson, can that have an effect in preventing them from getting pregnant in the future, even if they're not pregnant at that time?
Absolutely. Because of the autoimmune effect, they will be sterilized. We see a similar thing, interestingly enough, in where I worked in vaccine court with Gardasil injuries. And you can, that 25% of the kids with the Gardasil, and that relates to the lipid nanoparticle. And HPV, when you express viruses in the wrong tissue, more than 25% of the people getting the Gardasil injury or sterilized, the lipid nanoparticle that packages and protects the RNA from Moderna or the proteins, that particle with the polyethylene glycol, the women that are getting the COVID shot will have a relatively rapid autoimmune defect. We see the Parkinsonian shakes. We see the Huntington. You've seen the films on the High Wire and other shows of these injured girls who are now these young women who are now not only probably sterilized, but will never have a normal life. And what the government has done is the exact same thing they did with Gardasil injury, where we see lots of polycystic ovary disease. We see postural orthostatic tachycardia. We see ME-like symptoms, myalgic encephalomyelitis, inflammation of the brain and spinal cords leading to all these injuries. And the government calls it conversion disorder, or you're crazy. You were so anxious about taking the shot. No, these were frontline young women, doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals who stepped up and thought they were doing the right thing, and it's being covered up. So there's far more injury than we expect, and it's the same game played out over and over again over the past decade. It's important to note, the 6% of America, the last studies we did, the number was 6% of the controls had solid evidence of XMRV infection, made an antibody, had proteins. That 6% will die if given that shot almost immediately from the autoimmune reaction. I believe Tony Fauci's goal is to cover it up. That's why our samples from our studies, my materials from our labs, they were autoclaved, they were burned, the data destroyed and reinvented as something else, or they thought they were burned and autoclaved, I should say. But in COVID-19, the victims are being cremated. So I believe the big push to inject everyone with the COVID shots as quickly as possible is to say it was your endogenous viruses. You had it all along. It's just your immune system doesn't work and there's no cause. And we have a great deal of evidence for this. And we see that again, it'll be the vaccine injured. It'll be the Blacks. It'll be the Hispanics, the people who were already injured by the polio vaccines, by the MMR, by the shingle shots, the elderly. Those will be the people who will die right away. And that's,
let me ask you this. What is it about Blacks and Hispanics that makes them more vulnerable?
At least at one level, they make more antibodies. Their immune system is skewed to what is called a Th2 response. So they make antibodies and fight more parasites, worms. Think about why ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and Suramin. So over in Africa, the environment that they have more parasitic infections. They're not susceptible to these viruses, so their immune system is looking for parasites and skewed that way. And when you're skewed that way, you don't make a functional T cell type 1 immune response. There's also the gene that is the subject of our book, Plague, called Rna Cell. So Rna Cell is one of many RNases. RNA in the blood outside of the cell, outside of the cytoplasm, is a danger signal. So you have little Pac-Men that just gobble it up. And so Blacks, Hispanics, and we did this work in 1999 and 2000 at the National Cancer Institute, collaborating with Stefan Ams and others. And the work was to try to understand biomarkers of why Black men and women were more susceptible to hormone-driven prostate cancer, ovarian cancer, breast cancer. And one of those biological markers that we discovered was Rna Cell. And I'm telling you, this was back in 1999. So if those data had not been covered up by William Thompson, the CDC, the government, every level of the government, for 15 years, we could have protected them. There are biomarkers. One size doesn't fit all. A virus doesn't know if you're a black man, a gay man, a IV drug user. A virus knows your immune system. So whether it's environmental toxins that skew your immune system, like aluminum or mercury in some of the shots, or polysorbate 80, whether it's those environmental toxins or simply another pathogen. The idea is that pathogens rarely travel alone. HIV alone does not cause AIDS, as we learned. What in the summer of 2011, when John Coffin, Ian Lipkin, Harold Barmis were what I call waterboarding me and Frank Rossetti in order to get us to say there was no XMRV and it was not associated with these diseases. My answer was no. And what then Lasker Award winner, now Nobel laureate Harvey Alter and Shai-Xing Lo, who confirmed our results. They confirmed our results from a box in a freezer that had been there for 20 years that said non-HIV AIDS. There was no evidence of HIV. It was in women, children, other nurses, doctors, and they had myalgic encephalomyelitis, and that was the phenotypic display. They had other autoimmune disease, but they had the same functional T cell and innate immune defects as we would see in those that succumb. So in 2011, they said if XMRV existed, HIV AIDS patients would have it. And I said, no, they all died in the 80s and 90s. They all died when Arthur Ashe and Ryan White died from contaminated blood supply. This was what I thought was at the heart of taking out my work and me. And I said at that time, exhume them, I'll wait. So the cremation of the victims of COVID, so we can never find out what they died for, I believe is part, and a serious part, of the premeditated part of this story. By the way, this is my XMRV. We know I got XMRV. I seroconverted in 2010. We knew it was contagious cancer. And this is why I can't wear masks, and I can keep myself well because we know we healed those with HIV AIDS. So
Now,
I'll stop in a minute and drink coffee.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry to hear that. Now,
So
in terms of long-term effects, is it your testimony we don't know all of the long-term effects yet of taking these vaccines?
Oh, absolutely not. But what we do know is we're going to see accelerated cancers. We're going to see accelerated Parkinson's. Think about Lou Gehrig's disease, long associated with retroviral expression and infections, even HIV. We did that work. I isolated HIVs from somebody with Lou Gehrig's disease. We're already seeing bucket challenges, the cost to our economy, Alzheimer's disease. There's a protein called TDP40. TDP40 is TAR DNA binding protein 40. It's a transcription factor that turns on and off HIV. So the silence virus will come across. We already see that in Alzheimer's. We already see the accelerated aging. We see young and men and women, particularly in the military, PTSD, psychosis, cancer. I give you the military family of Sheila Ely and her husband, Ronnie, and they're heavily vaccinated. Sheila Ely is the mother of Temple, who is the injured kid, black child, who got MMR, a double dose. We know from the movie Medical Racism and the work of Children's Health Defense, we know how a double dose of MMR vaccine was given to the children in the inner city, the blacks and kids in the inner city of LA in the mid 90s, killing and maiming men. So we see the cancers. Sheila Ely has cancer. Her son is injured. We see those immunological defects. They're acquired immune deficiencies. The military is heavily vaccinated. We see the migraines, we see the capillary, the bleeding disorders. As I said, so you can see the diseases accelerated. It's called accelerated myelopoiesis. Your innate immune system is exhausted. Your blood stem cell, TGF beta, this is Frank Rossetti's expertise and ours. It just produces so many monocytes, natural killer cells, dendritic cell, because it does not have the energy, the mitochondria or the energy of the cell. We simply won't have the energy to go fight the billions of particles, so that those people with comorbidities will have an imbalanced host response to SARS-CoV-2 and die immediately. But children, for generations, children and others can end up with cancers very young. We have a 41-year-old daughter-in-law with colon cancer. We're seeing neuroendocrine tumors where it's every day cancer in 30-year-olds. Just lost somebody from Gardasil, cervical cancer caused by the Gardasil injection. So when you mix the vaccines in all the schedule, it's important to understand that the COVID vaccine, that shot of just the disease-causing entity will spin every organ system to attack itself, and nobody knows the long-term effects.
Judy, your condition right now, you acquired that condition by virtue of working with these viruses, correct?
Correct.
Actually, yeah.
The government knows it, and Tony Fauci knows it. And that's the chapter of our book. I believe it's chapter 8 of Plague. And it was the July 22nd, 2009 invitation only meeting. And during that meeting, it was clear the lab workers, the animal care facilities people were seroconverting. That was, they made antibodies to the virus, which means they clearly were infected. And I actually seroconverted. The culpability here, I worked for 22 years, as I told you, in the biosafety level 3 and 4 facilities. I never seroconverted. I never got HIV. They stored my blood for the better part of 20 years. I can prove exactly the day we seroconverted, and that proves that we knew in the July 22nd invitation only meeting what every highest level of the government, we have in our book exactly who attended that meeting, from the NCI, from the CDC, from the various levels of the government, that shows the lab workers were seroconverting. And the statement made in the lab is, we can't afford to retrofit all of the laboratories that are biosafety level 2 to biosafety level 3. And we certainly can't afford to pay for the injured who caught these. And many of my colleagues, as you see in Plague of Corruption, died because they were biosafety level 2. And after I was fired, locked down, and taken out of science, and they thought they had all the data, they were publishing papers from 2012, 13 on up to this day, said unintended release of a biosafety level 2 contaminant. Unintended release. So they simply named it biosafety level 2, which is a typical lab bench. So those people were nosocomial. They caught it from the lab like I did. And all the government had to do on July 22nd, 2009 was simply stop it. Simply stop everything. And they chose to cover it up.
Now, with regard to women who have taken it, who aren't pregnant yet, is there a greater risk if they do bear a child later of mutations of that child?
Absolutely, and lifelong disease and cancer. Absolutely, because
Do you know what kind of mutations will occur? Is it autism or what? I mean, what other Down syndrome, anything to that effect?
Well, I don't
The
call
words in
them,
your mouth. Yeah.
I don't call them mutations as much as I call them epigenetic. It's the expression of the gene dysregulated. So what you're going to see is gene expression, which in effect can look like a mutations. So you'll absolutely see multiple sclerosis, cancers. We're seeing in the young women right now a cancer called acute myelogenous leukemia. That is a cancer of 80-year-olds who fail to methylate and silence and turn on and off their tumor suppressor and oncogenes according to the programming, provided by God of our cells. So this is, we are seeing, this is a disease of 80-year-olds. We've seen 15 years old with acute myelogenous leukemia. It's deadly. We are already seeing the explosion of childhood cancer. And so you'll see childhood cancer, you'll see Parkinson's, if the child survives, and certainly autism, certainly children without brains, without the ability, without the ability to communicate. We're seeing blindness, a lot of blindness, a lot of sensory processing disorders, lots and lots of lung disease, and asthma, as we know.
Now Pfizer came out in the last several weeks and said that the vaccine won't last more than 6 months. You'll have to be revaccinated for booster shots. The others have acknowledged that as well. Is that accurate in your opinion? Is it? I mean, what does all this mean? Do you need to get vaccinated more than 6 months? Because from my perspective, the big pharma has a huge profit motive here. They're making trillions and trillions of dollars. The politicians, Biden and Harris and others before them, the motive is political, that we somehow are your savior, that we're going to save the country and the world with these vaccines. Vote for me. But what's the truth here about the need to get revaccinated, even assuming that the vaccine works?
Well, again, the
works is a term in quotes.
Yeah, there's no evidence of that. So, and again, it's not the booster shot. In my opinion, I believe that this emergency use authorization was used to have a control group, and that there were hot lots and there were saline lots. And I believe, just as in the original clinical trials where they were stopped very quickly and everybody was inoculated, I believe the boosters are going to be so that they can, once they do their experiments on people and see who if anything I'm saying comes true, which we can see it is now, the people who have been injured and died from the COVID shot in 4 months has exceeded every vaccine on the schedule since the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Act. So this is the deadliest shot, the deadliest month. And I believe the booster shot is to make sure the control group is injected. Pfizer has told here in California, we've learned that the school systems are going to mandate. We see college, we see high schools, that they will have full FDA approval by the fall. So in 2 months, and in the original FDA documents, the applications, it said the studies would be complete by 2021 and 2022 and 2023. And so here you are now, you've greatly accelerated that. How did you do that? You had controls in this study. So you're going to very quickly booster somebody. They don't know when it lasts. Tony Fauci makes this up. He literally makes this up. He says whatever he wants on any given day. The people who are convalescent from the COVID infection, from the influenza of that year. Again, the PCR products sequenced were not SARS-CoV-2. That's a monkey virus. Prove to me it was in a human. Sorry, it wasn't in a human until you injected the disease, and that's the spike protein. And so, at any rate, the people who died, it was influenza A and influenza B. When you sequence that product of that PCR, the only ones we can get a hold of. We're working right now to get lots, and we have been for quite some time, doctors to get samples of all the vaccines and manufacturers from several lots so that we can do independent analysis and show exactly what's in these shots. We have no idea. So they're Yeah.
Is it your opinion, based upon what you know, since this is your area of expertise, that both our so-called government and big pharma are withholding information about people who've been seriously injured and died from these vaccines?
Absolutely. The vaccine adverse events reporting system is known. 10 years ago, a paper was published in Harvard that said it was a government funded paper. It was recording and capturing only 1% of the data. And here again, a few weeks ago, that was confirmed. And I know personally from at least 4 emergency room physicians around the country, 2 here in California, that essentially everyone coming into the ER, many people have some kind of vaccine adverse event. And the other physicians are shaming them, not reporting them, turning away, turning the patients out of the hospital. And those who report are at risk of losing their job. And
What can
come out.
people, 2 questions. Does the vaccine alter your DNA? Does it have a long-term effect in that regard?
It alters the expression of your DNA, absolutely. It can alter the epigenetic regulation, which means it can permanently turn genes on or off.
Now, what can people do who swallowed the so-called Kool-Aid and already took the vaccine, either 1 shot or 2 shots? Is there anything they can do to try to alleviate what you've just described could happen in terms of short-term, medium-term, long-term effects, and even death?
Oh, sure, very much. Everything, in fact, all of that can be ameliorated, but we really have to stop right now. You can use all of those therapies we developed in the 80s, everything we know that would prevent COVID. Remember, the spike protein is the disease. So if you were worried about this infection, you take off the mask, because you can't compromise your immune system. You use quercetin, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine prophylactically, vitamin D, vitamin C, literally go back to your life. You can I've got some in front of me right now. This is an ozone total body cream. We have investigators right now today who are working. I attended the American Academy of Ozone Therapy last weekend with expert Frank Schallenberger. All of these therapies that would have worked in HIV/AIDS, that did work in Ebola. Remember, that was contagious Ebola, convalescent serum, everything we can do to protect those who have already had the disease or the vaccine and not gotten any kind of sick will have antibodies, but we must protect them. And in fact, the most important thing is never another shot of any kind. Nothing, no other shots, no influenza shots. We've got to restore their immune system to balance. We have testing. We can tell exactly who have the mutations. We can provide nutritional support. We can provide ozonated things. We know from our experiments, as the virus comes through the spike protein and in that lipid nanoparticle, that fake synthetic virus comes through the skin. The ozone cream alone will break up the particle. The ozone cream will break up the particle. We have cannabis creams. We have balms. There are papers published on cannabinoid therapies. We can restore the metabolism. Yeah, we've got all the tools. And I give you Ebola, that outbreak was stopped. So was HIV/AIDS, natural products, natural healing, no GMOs, no toxic food, none of the lockdowns.
Now, except for you and Kent, who, if anyone, is out there offering these remedies right now that people can turn to?
Oh, many chiropractors around the world. Starting last September, I talked to very large groups of chiropractors. I gave presentations to the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Kent and I are I'm a chemist. All I do is educate the doctors. I educate the doctors and they practice. The American Frontline Doctors are doing that. Simone Gold, Lee Merritt, it. We're Dr. Sherry Tenpenny. I am this weekend at the Free and the Brave conference in Yuba City, California, where Dr. David Martin, Dr. Henry Ely is another one. Many, many, many doctors worldwide are waking up. And that's why the censorship of us and in the recent events of me being, taken off a plane inappropriately are a problem. We've got to stop the censorship and allow us, the scientists, to speak and silence Tony Fauci and these criminals. And that's why we're here.
Now, based upon your knowledge and experience, Tony Fauci, who's become, in effect, the Pope of vaccines. Okay, no disparagement to the Pope for anybody that's Catholic. Okay, but why isn't he out there, based on your opinion and your knowledge, providing this information to the American people and to the world?
To cover up 40 years of these crimes against humanity and the murder of millions of people. We could have stopped AIDS with peptide T. We could have stopped AIDS with interferon, HIV/AIDS. We did stop Ebola, the contagious Ebola, the courageous doctors in the book I mentioned, Called for Life, with convalescent serum. So now what they're doing is saying, oh no, if you got the infection last year, you're not immune. Antibodies drive disease. We saw that in HIV/AIDS. Tony Fauci, in my opinion, experience and knowledge, is covering up his crimes of 4 decades, calling it something else. And he escapes what is the truth.
So in effect, notwithstanding what he did to create the situation, the cover-up is causing millions of people to have serious health consequences, if not death.
COVID-19 is the cover-up. And had the FBI and the attorney generals of Nevada not kept under seal for 5 years, the QTAM, the whistleblower lawsuit that I brought forth at pro se, best I could do, no lawyers will touch this, that lawsuit was dismissed in October of 2019. They had all of the data and everything I've told you on terabyte hard drives. It's the last chapter of our book, Plague of Corruption. Had they done their job then, we wouldn't have COVID now.
If you can, Judy, Dr. Mikovits, come back next week. We'll continue with this. If you have the time. If not, we're going to make time at a subsequent citizens grand jury. We have a lot of stuff to do to present to the American people. It's not just a question of exposing criminality and prosecuting. It's a question of giving information to the American people so they can defend themselves, so they can save themselves from these effects of the vaccines.
Right. We have
COVID-19. So you're performing a great service in giving them information that they can then take and go see various physicians and other experts and research themselves so they do not experience these short, medium, and long-term effects. I want to turn it over now to Kent Heckenlively, your partner. Kent, give us your background, your expertise, how you came to work with Dr. Mikovits, and tell us, in your words, you're like me, you're a layman, okay, in many ways, what it is, the essence of what Judy is saying. I mean, everybody can figure out what Judy's saying because she's extremely intelligent and bright, but you are very helpful in terms of putting it in very simple language. And if you can do that, that would be great.
Thank you, Larry, for having me on. So my background, I graduated with a double major in English political science from Paris College in 1985. I was chosen as the school's Rhodes Scholar candidate. I graduated from Golden Gate University Law School in 1990. I was on law review as a writer and editor. I came to know Judy about 10 years ago, shortly after the publication of her article in the journal Science, which is the world's most prestigious journal of original research. Started writing our book, Plague, in probably about 2011, published in 2013. Since then, we've gone on to write a number of other books together. We wrote The Case for Masks. Now, one thing is, you cannot buy this book on Amazon. You can only buy it at Barnes & Noble or from Books A Million, Simon & Schuster. because even though our publisher, Skyhorse, has a book called The Case for Masks, which is allowed to be published on Amazon, Amazon has banned The Case Against Masks. So that's part of the censorship. Really, along with Dr. Brian Hooker, who is really my unacknowledged co-writer on this book, Inoculated, How Science Lost Its Soul in Autism. This is about the Dr. William Thompson case. This was published in 2016, republished in 2020. This is all about how our medical system has gone after the African-American community. Also, with Dr. Joseph Cummins, I wrote the book called The Case for Interferon. This is a book which received a preferred review from Kirkus. It's all about the interferon that Dr. Mikovits has talked about. And then there's our book, Plague of Corruption, which became a #1 Amazon bestseller, #2 on the New York Times bestseller list. So I think that my superpower, if you can say that, is that I can simplify complex ideas for the general public. And then what I do is I make sure that I talk to people, that I'm collaborating with acknowledged experts in the field, like Dr. Mikovits, to make sure that I'm rendering things accurately. So you would ask me here specifically to talk about Dr. Anthony Fauci. And I'd like to do that. And as you say, as an attorney, I think like an attorney, and hopefully I can present a certain narrative which may be more understandable to the general population. So let me talk about Dr. Anthony Fauci. In my opinion, the way to understand Dr. Anthony Fauci is that he sits on top of a throne of corruption. Okay? That throne of corruption is our entire public health system. Now, let me talk a little bit about that throne. This is a throne that Tony Fauci has helped to build, just as J. Edgar Hoover built the FBI, then proceeded to violate the civil rights of Americans for decades. I'm an attorney, but for the past 15 years, I've been a middle school science teacher, okay? And so I think that's given me a different perspective of things. So there's a way that science is supposed to work, okay? The way science is supposed to work is basically there's supposed to be a republic of experts, if you will, okay? And those leading scientists will guide science and medicine in certain directions. But that got changed, as Dr. Mikovits talked about, with the founding of the National Cancer Institute. So what started happening in the 70s and then accelerated with Ronald Reagan is that we went from a republic of science experts to essentially an empire of science with emperors. And foremost among those emperors is Tony Fauci. So Tony Fauci sits really at the top of the scientific pyramid, and he controls the funding, okay? Funding to a scientist equals survival. And Fauci puts himself at the center of that funding. I want to talk about Tony Fauci's failings in 4 different areas, and I think I can get through this in about 10 minutes. First of all, the failure in HIV/AIDS. Okay, as Dr. Judy Mikovits talked about, there's really the Th1 and Th2 pathways. Okay, and so the Th1 pathway in HIV/AIDS patients was really where we needed to focus our intervention. To the best of my understanding, Tony Fauci had patent rights in a whole bunch of Th2 drugs. He pushed those for years at the expense of the Th1 pathways, resulting in the death of millions. Also, Tony Fauci was pushing later drug intervention rather than early drug intervention. Dr. Judy Mikovits' pioneering research suggested that as soon as HIV was detected in a person's system, we needed to intervene with the drugs at appropriate levels so that they would silence the virus and they would never develop AIDS. Judy defended her research shortly after the basketball player Magic Johnson was diagnosed as having been exposed. The question that she was asked was whether he would develop AIDS and die. Her answer was no, because they were intervening quickly. And as everybody knows, Magic Johnson is still alive. The second failure of Tony Fauci was in chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, chronic fatigue syndrome, also known as MECFS, strikes primarily, but not exclusively, women. It happened in concert with the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and similar immunological markers were abnormal in both groups. To put it most simply, in the HIV/AIDS patients, the immune system defenders, which are most likened to the soldiers, were devastated. There were a lot of generals, but there weren't enough foot soldiers in the immune system. In chronic fatigue syndrome, it was the reverse. There were a lot of soldiers, but not generals. So the immune system was attacking. Okay? So, different outcome, but similar abnormalities. What Tony Fauci championed, the idea that these women didn't have an actual disease, but they were career women who'd been broken because they worked in the male-dominated corporate world. In other words, they just couldn't handle the stress. This was a crime against the women, okay? To say that these women just can't handle working in the men's world. Well, Judy Mikovits blew that theory out of the water with her groundbreaking work in XMRV. The third failure of Tony Fauci has been in autism. So when parents reported their children changed after vaccination, he championed the idea that correlation doesn't equal causation, calling the parents crazy. The same strategy he used in chronic fatigue syndrome. Tony Fauci did nothing as the numbers with autism went from 1 in 10,000 30 years ago to 1 in 45 today. In 2014, Tony Fauci intervened when CDC whistleblower Dr. William Thompson came forward with information that earlier administration of the MMR, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, was leading to increased rates of autism, particularly in African American males. He led the campaign against it, okay? By his own admission, Dr. Fauci's favorite book of philosophy is The Godfather. He refers to it not as his favorite book, but his favorite book of philosophy. It's clear to me that when villains tell the truth, you should listen to them. It's my contention that Fauci acts like a mafia don, getting others to do his dirty work so his hands remain clean. And now we come to Dr. Anthony Fauci and the COVID deceptions. First, we were told masks weren't necessary, then they became essential. Second, the COVID test PCR cycles too high so that it would magnify junk scraps of DNA, possibly of other more common coronaviruses, and create mass hysteria in the population. Third, They designed experiments to fail when using promising therapies like hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, vitamin D, and zinc. Fourth, because they spiked the trials of these promising therapies, they were able to obtain emergency use authorization for their insane vaccines, which they developed at warp speed, skipping animal and long-term testing. It's time to bring Dr. Anthony Fauci to justice. The ideal of science, a republic of experts arguing with data and logic. Fauci has been the architect of an empire of science, with him as the unchallenged emperor. By his own actions, Fauci has committed crimes against the gay population, women, children, the Black community, and indeed all of humanity. Fauci has been in charge of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases since 1984, when he was 43 years old. Now he is 80. Imagine yourself such undisputed power from the age of 43 to 80. In closing, I want to talk about this book, The Faucian Bargain. Okay, you can get this on Amazon. I also encourage you to read an upcoming book called The Real Anthony Fauci by Robert Kennedy Jr. And this book, The Faucian Bargain, has been endorsed by Governor Ron DeSantis, Senator Ted Cruz, and Senator Rand Paul. I want to read a brief section about Dr. Anthony Fauci from an insider talking about how he responded during the COVID crisis. The question was, can you describe the evolution of Fauci's influence and how you saw it evolve and accumulate? The insider. Early on, it seemed the team of medical experts were pretty equal in clout. Debbie Birx had as much influence as Fauci. CDC Director Michael Redfield had as much say as Birx, and so on. But the entire team came from largely the same gene pool, if you will. Birx and Fauci started to move forward because that's what they do. And they came in highly regarded for their past work on infectious disease, global pandemics, and their work on AIDS. However, as time went on and we started getting real-time data beyond just these frightening models and projections, that data didn't always corroborate the narrative. So we began to push back on them, and not always because we disagreed or suspected something was amiss, but because science, by definition, is supposed to be tested, not just taken at face value because someone said so. Fauci would not to this, and when you're having these conversations internally, eventually you're going to defer to doctors you presume have more of airborne viruses. But their stories didn't always add up. For example, we were told there was no human-to-human transmission. Obviously, that didn't turn out to be true. There were other things that didn't turn out to be true, but it's a novel virus. So at first you wanted to trust experts to some degree, especially when you've got airports and cruise ships still out there that could be mass carrier events, and you're struggling to get a handle on the situation as soon as you can. And it was Fauci who said repeatedly, not just in the news, but also in meetings, that the flu was much worse. He even told us at first that COVID wasn't something we should be concerned about, and that we don't need masks. So, in conclusion, it's time to bring an end to Tony Fauci's 37-year reign of fear and terror. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions, Larry.
Well, we're going to table the questions till next week, Ken. Can you come back next week on our Citizens Grand Jury? We'll schedule it so it's convenient for you and
Yes.
Judy. Yeah, we've been going an hour and a half. But I want to play right now just some video with regard to China. Okay, what's been going on there as well. But you've certainly performed a tremendously valuable service, the two of you, for the American people, because this information does not come out on Fox News, it does not come out on MSNBC, it does not come out on CNN or any other place, is that, in fact, they've deified Fauci and they are presenting false information to the American people. We live in this cancel culture world, which is a nice way of putting it. But consequently, the American people do need to wake up, and they do need to research things. They need to take what you and Dr. Mikovits have said and take it a step further, because we don't know the long-term effects, much less the short or medium-term effects fully, because the information is not being disclosed. And your Freedom Watch is going to be filing Freedom of Information Act requests following up on this information. But more importantly, and this is what I pointed out at the beginning of this citizens grand jury, without the American people rising up and meting out justice themselves, there will be no justice. There'll be no justice in the court in Dallas, Texas. There'll be no justice in Jerusalem, Israel. There'll be no justice at The Hague unless we expose enough of this information and bring our own criminal indictments such that we force them into taking action. And as I write about in my book, and you're both in my book, I might add, as not just witnesses in this case, but my esteemed and valued clients, is the fact that we can't trust the federal judges, the judges who have been put there with campaign contributions, perks, and sometimes out and out bribes, that Jefferson said, because they're unelected, unaccountable to the people, would become despots and tyrants, causing us to shed the blood of patriots and tyrants again every 20 years, adding what's a few thousand dead to refresh the tree of liberty. Now, Jefferson did not want to see anyone dead or hurt, and neither do I, and neither do you, and that's why we're doing what we're doing right now. But this is where the country will be going.
Sorry to interrupt. Let me just pause you for 1 second. We've got this very vexing that has got to do with the operating system software, and I've been trying for a week to repair it. I just want to make sure that we have the optimal quality before we continue with the videos that we're going to be showing. I know, I apologize, but we should be back now. The problem's been eliminated.
Okay, so wrap it up, because we've got to finish this by 10 to the hour, okay, because I have an important meeting to go to, and we'll bring everybody back. And I wanted to let this information come out fully. The bottom line is this, is that the American people need to rise up and restore their justice system just like our founding fathers did in 1776. And we need to mete out justice ourselves fairly and peacefully and legally. And that's what Jefferson was talking about. That's what I'm talking about. So without further ado, as we say, let's roll the videotape. Let's adjourn at 10 minutes of the hour. We will present the indictments to the citizens grand jury after the testimony is completed next week, and we will schedule times and let people know in advance at the convenience of Dr. Mikovits and Kent Heckenlively, so we can wrap this all up, because it's very, very important, not just for Americans to know, but for the world to know, because we have been severely harmed by the communist Chinese in complicity with Fauci and the American government. They're both responsible for what went on. And that helps explain, I believe it helps explain why, President Trump, who, I loved and also supported, we were in effect his law firm at Freedom Watch, among others. And we were his de facto law firm trying to keep him from being destroyed on behalf of the American people. But it explains why he never really did much with China either, simply calling them the Kung Flu virus, because I believe he knew, and he was probably briefed by someone, that in fact we sowed the seeds for our own destruction. And Fauci, as Kent points out, was the point person in doing that for many, many years. So let's roll the videotape, Jason. Let's break at 10 minutes to the hour, okay? And we'll reconvene next week.
What we've got here, Larry, this is testimony from just last week before the Senate. This is Anthony Fauci being questioned by Senator Rand Paul, who is, of course, a medical doctor.
Dr. Fauci.
He went to Duke University, as a matter of fact, my alma mater.
In Wuhan or evolved naturally, but we should want to know 3 million people have died from this pandemic, and that should cause us to explore all possibilities. Instead, government authorities, self-interested in continuing gain-of-function research, say there's nothing to see here. Gain-of-function research, as you know, is juicing up naturally occurring animal viruses to infect humans. To arrive at the truth, the U.S. government should admit that the Wuhan Virology Institute was experimenting to enhance the coronavirus's ability to infect humans. Juicing up superviruses is not new. Scientists in the U.S. have long known how to mutate animal viruses to infect humans. For years, Dr. Ralph Barrick, a virologist in the U.S., has been collaborating with Dr. Shi Zhengli of the Wuhan Virology Institute, sharing his discoveries about how to create superviruses. This gain-of-function research has been funded by the NIH. The collaboration between the U.S. and the Wuhan Virology Institute continues. Doctors Barrick and Shi worked together to insert bat virus spike protein into the backbone of the deadly SARS virus, and then use this man-made supervirus to infect human airway cells. Think about that for a moment. The SARS virus had a 15% mortality. We're fighting a pandemic that has about a 1% mortality. Can you imagine if a SARS virus that's been juiced up and had viral proteins added to it, to the spike protein, if that were released accidentally? Dr. Fauci, do you still support funding of the NIH funding of the lab in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, with all due respect, you are entirely and completely incorrect that the NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute
Do they fund
of
Dr.
Virology.
Barrick?
We do not fund.
Do you fund Dr. Barrick's gain-of-function research?
Dr. Barrett does not doing gain-of-function research, and if it is, it's according to the guidelines, and it is being conducted in North Carolina, not
You don't think
in
inserting
China.
a bat virus spike protein that he got from the Wuhan Institute into the SARS virus is gain-of-function?
That is
You would be
not-
in the minority because at least 200 scientists have signed a statement from the Cambridge Working Group saying that it is gain-of-function.
Well, it is not. And if you look at the grant and you look at the progress reports, it is not gain of function, despite the fact that people tweet that.
So
they
do you
write
still
about it.
support sending money to the Wuhan Virology Institute?
We do not send money now to the Wuhan
Do you
Virology
support
Institute.
sending money? We did, under your tutelage. We were sending it through EcoHealth. It was a sub-agency and a sub-grant. Do you support that the money from NIH that was going to the Wuhan Institute?
Let me explain to you why that was done. The SARS-CoV-1 originated in bats in China. It would have been irresponsible of us if we did not investigate the bat viruses and the serology to see who might have been
Or
infected.
perhaps it would be
in China.
irresponsible to send it to the Chinese government that we may not be able to trust with this knowledge and with this incredibly dangerous viruses. Government scientists like yourself who favor gain-of-function research.
I don't favor gain-of-function
maintain
research
that
in
the
China.
disease
You are
arose
saying
naturally.
things that are not correct.
Government defenders of gain-of-function, such as yourself, say that COVID-19 mutations were random and not designed by man. But interestingly, the technique that Dr. Barrick developed forces mutations by serial passage through cell culture that the mutations appear to be natural. In fact, Dr. Barrick named the technique the no-see-'em technique because the mutations appear naturally. Nicholas Baker in the New York Magazine said nobody would know if the virus had been fabricated in a laboratory or grown in nature. Government authorities in the U.S., including yourself, unequivocally deny that COVID-19 could have escaped a lab. But even Dr. Shi in Wuhan wasn't so sure. According to Nicholas Baker, Dr. Shi wondered, could this new virus have come from her own laboratory? She checked her records frantically and found no matches. That really took a load off my mind, she said. I had not slept for days. The director of the gain-of-function research in Wuhan couldn't sleep because she was terrified that it might be in her lab. Dr. Barrick, an advocate of gain-of-function research, admits the main problem that the Institute of Virology has is the outbreak occurred in close proximity. What are the odds? Barrick responded, could you rule out a laboratory escape? The answer in this case is probably not. Will you, in front of this group, categorically say that the COVID-19 could not have occurred through serial passage in a laboratory?
I do not have any accounting of what the Chinese may have done, and I'm fully in favor of any further investigation of what went on in China. However, I will repeat again, the NIH and NIAID categorically has not funded gain-of-function research to be conducted in the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
You support it in the U.S. We have 11 labs doing it, and you have allowed it here. We have a committee to do it, but the committee has granted every exemption. You're fooling with Mother Nature here. You're allowing superviruses to be created with a 15% mortality. It's very dangerous. I think it was a huge mistake to share this with China, and it's a huge mistake to allow this to continue in the United States. And we should be very careful to investigate where this virus came from.
I fully agree that you should investigate where the virus came from. But again, we have not funded gain-of-function research on this virus in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, no matter how many times you say it,
There
it
was
didn't happen.
research. There was research done with Dr. Shi and Dr. Barrick. They have collaborated on gain-of-function research where they enhanced the SARS virus to infect human airway cells, and they did it by merging a new spike protein on it. That is gain-of-function. That was joint research between the Wuhan Institute and Dr. Barrick. You can't deny it.
Senator Paul, your time has expired. Dr. Fauci, I will let you respond to that when we need to move on.
Excuse me?
I will allow you to respond to that, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say, I don't know how many times I can say it, Madam Chair. We did not fund gain-of-function research to be conducted in the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Okay,
You know,
great,
Larry,
Ken.
I've
Oh,
only-
we've got another count we can add to our indictment when it's presented. It's called perjury. Okay.
I was going to say, I've only been deposed once, but that was a very qualified statement from Anthony Fauci about what he did or did not do.
Well, he was very cool in making the statement because he's practiced the statement. That's obvious. And I thought that Senator Paul did an excellent job. You know, I've been critical of my own university lately because of what they've done to their academic integrity with their basketball program, but I've got to thank them for educating Dr. Rand Paul because he went to Duke Medical School. In any event, we're going to hold the video of former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who also lays the blame right at China on the doorstep. And he, of course, was director of the CIA. If it's short, we can actually play it now, Jason. Otherwise, we'll hold it.
It's a little bit long.
Yeah,
I think we should do it next week.
Let's hold it, and we'll hold it till then. But of course, as director of the CIA, he had access to intelligence. And even if the NSA is trained against the American people, and the director of national intelligence and the Defense Intelligence Agency train their sights on the American people with mass surveillance, the fact is they had this information. The American government's had this information, and they have kept it from the American people. And he's starting to come clean with it. There's some things he can't say, but we're going to play it next week. I want to thank Dr. Mikovits. I want to thank Kent Heckenlively. Excellent, excellent testimony. Excellent. You've done a great service for the American people and a great service for the world. I urge people to go out and get your books and read them and to spread the word that you don't take anything that the government says on face value. And I'm reminded of the famous expression of President Ronald Reagan, in my view, the greatest president in the modern era of our lifetime, who said, the most dangerous words in the English language are, hi, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help you. You know, right now, the American people need to do it for themselves. We need to rise up. As I say in my book, it takes a revolution. Forget the scandal industry. Get up off the couch, turn off cable news, and get to work and educate yourself, because the lives of you and your family depend on it. Now they want to vaccinate your children as well. They're forcing people to do it either psychologically or in terms of giving them entry into certain public venues. Governor Andrew Cuomo is in a pack of trouble in his own right, although I doubt anything will happen because it's usually covered up by the government. Has not allowed people into the Radio City Music Hall unless they're vaccinated. This is just the beginning of what's going to happen. So educate yourself. But from our standpoint, we're bringing about justice. We'll be back next week. with the 9th session of our citizens grand juries, and we will let people know far and wide when they can tune in. But thank you, Judy, and thank you, Kent, for your fine testimony and for your service. You're true American patriots who are there for the American people. We appreciate that.
Larry, I also want to thank everyone who's been watching us today, and I want to remind Crowdsource the Truth viewers and supporters of FreedomWatchUSA.org that they can now get information about and register to join the Third Continental Congress. It's going to be happening July 5th and 6th in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This is going to be a historic event, so I really hope that people will join us. It's being hosted by Freedom Watch, and I hope that people will visit FreedomWatchUSA.org and make a tax-deductible contribution. Larry and his team at Freedom Watch can't conduct these citizens' grand juries and important events like the Third Continental Congress without your support. I also want to remind viewers that they can support this channel by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. The information we've been sharing today, true as it likely is highly controversial and extremely likely to be the target of censorship by YouTube, by Facebook, by some of these mainstream platforms. So please become a sponsor and help Crowdsource the Truth continue innovating so that I can use technology to bring you information that big tech doesn't want you to see. Larry, thank you so much for another excellent citizens grand jury. I want to thank the jurors.
Let me be clear about this, Jason. If people start messing with sending information to the American people that they need to know, then these entities, YouTube and the rest of them, will be indicted as well, because that will be criminal as well. So that's a warning to anybody that seeks to censor anything that we're saying. We're trying to educate the American people. And if Rand Paul can say it, the Senator of the United States can say it, then Freedom Watch and our witnesses can say it too. So let that be a warning. Let the line be drawn in the sand in that regard. So that's where we are today. We'll be back next week. I want to thank everybody for participating in this Citizens Grand Jury. God bless you. Stay safe and educate yourself and your family. You are the most important commodity, the most important treasure that the American nation has, the new nation. And we will be inviting Dr. Mikovits and Mr. Heckenlively to the Third Continental Congress. I hope that they appear, because they're going to be very important in terms of forming a new nation. Well, we have the same nation, but at least declaring independence and getting a real government that protects us, not the one that we currently have. God bless you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you to our grand jurors, and thank you to our expert witnesses. I'll see everyone later with Jack Cashel. Thanks for watching, everybody.